Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live today. My name is Stephanie Dorwart, and I'm the owner and CEO of Altius Healthcare Consulting Group. Altius focuses on improving the financial and operational performance of hospitals and healthcare organizations. And today, I am joined by my Chief Operating Officer, RandiLynn Lukac.
Well,
And
hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited to dive into today's topic.
And today we are going to share some fun information with all of our listeners. And we're going to take our 20 years of consulting experience working with hospitals and healthcare organizations on productivity, workforce optimization, and staffing effectiveness. And we're going to share stories, experiences, myths, and things to debunk about productivity and what it is. And at the end, we hope to leave you with smart strategies that you can use at your organization. And we're just here to have some fun. So I hope you've grabbed your coffee, your lunch, and with that, we're ready to roll. And while we're here, if you would like to drop down in the chat where you're from, or even more importantly, what's your opinion of productivity, or what's a funny productivity story that you have? So first, we're going to talk about the fact that if I just add more staff members, we'll be more productive. If I have more hours, we're going to get more done. I just need more hours, more people, more shifts, more, and then we'll be productive.
Well, I think that's a great concept, right? To think that if we can't get the work done, we're definitely going to need to have more people to accomplish it. But really, I'm gonna kind of come at this from two different angles. One, we really want to think about that philosophy of having the right person in the right place, performing the right task for the right outcome. It's not necessarily about having more people. It's having the right people with the right tools to perform the right task. But to think about that a little bit more differently, if I have more hours, I'm going to be more productive. If that could really lead to staff burnout. If we're going to have them scheduled more, if we're going to have to use overtime. Now we're looking at staff burnout. We're looking at that feeling of overworked. They're feeling fatigued, which can then lead to turnover. So more isn't always better. Oh, and I have one more thought around this that I can add to this, because this could be, you could come at this from so many different angles. More hours equals more productivity. But have you ever thought about how long it takes you to do something? Really thought about it. And we could think back to our college days where we would really procrastinate on getting that project done or writing that research paper. But it holds true in our day-to-day. It holds true when we're looking at our team and we're giving them 8 hours in a day to complete something. They're going to take those 8 hours to get the job done. If we give you 6 hours or give you more tasks in that time frame, it's possible that you could get it done in less time, or you could do more tasks in that time frame. It's really about prioritizing and really doing the right tasks. Again, it goes right back to that philosophy of the right person with the right tools, performing the right task for the right outcome.
That is so true. I could definitely take a task that should take me 5 minutes and stretch it to take 3 or 4 hours if I want to.
I think we're all pretty good at that at times, right? I think we all can do that.
Which brings me to, the next story that we often hear all the time. And, it tends to come in, we'll enter into an organization. We're brought in to do an assessment, to look at benchmarks, to identify opportunities. And the first thing we're here is, you're here for layoffs, right? We're going to have a staffing reduction, and, you're just going to tell us who I need to cut. And really, what we often hear is that productivity is just a nice word for layoffs. And honestly, my first experience in a hospital, after getting my MHA and, working at a 300-bed hospital was with productivity. I actually started on a Monday, and the organization had laid off 200 people the previous Friday. And it gave me a real insight into the perception of productivity in those environments, in those situations. So let's debunk this one, because productivity and layoffs honestly should not be related.
So I think that far too often they are, right? I think that because productivity is used as a fix and not necessarily as a proactive approach, we see where layoffs come into play. We've come in on the back end. You know this. We've come into projects, we've come into organizations on the back end of a layoff, and all of a sudden it's productivity's fault. Well, actually, if we had productivity in place, we probably wouldn't be at the point where we need a layoff. And it really hurts my heart when people make them synonymous, when people are saying, oh, layoffs and productivity, they're one and one, because they really shouldn't be, because productivity should be proactive. Productivity should be part of our daily operations, our daily culture, our daily conversations, our language, our expectations. And when we're in that situation where we are living and breathing productivity because it's part of the business of our department, we aren't going to have a layoff because we're prepared for how to flex our staff up and down. We're prepared for growth. We know how to grow appropriately because we're paying attention to our productivity. So it's just so heartbreaking when those two words come together, because they really should be so far apart from each other that they're never crossing paths.
Yeah, productivity should be the foundation for a culture of excellence. When you're really focusing on productivity, you're not using it as punishment or weaponized. It should become that culture of excellence. And if we look at all the benchmarks and our productivity reports with curiosity and start to inquire why there's opportunity, we take away the layoff perspective from things, which brings us to, where do those numbers come from? One of the areas that we get asked questions all the time is, where'd this number on the report come from? And do you roll the dice and just come up with my benchmark and you shake the black box and out comes my target? And the reality is, that we're here to talk through is that productivity is not just a black box of numbers that are made up. And we do not use some kind of magic to come up with the targets.
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard not to lean into this one sometimes because it is a funny concept, right? That we as industry experts, as the experienced as we are, that we would come in and we would just randomly pick numbers and say, oh, here's your targets because this is what I felt like setting your targets at today, or I pulled them out of my magic box and this is your target. They're so strategic and they're so methodical and they're so appropriate and chosen based off of data and based off of benchmarking and where the organization needs to be. There is so much consideration that goes into setting targets, or I should say there should be so much consideration that goes into setting targets. We should never just be choosing targets because we didn't plan. We don't have the right data. We don't have the right information that's driving those decisions. So it could possibly feel like this target was just chosen for you. But I think it goes back to even the culture and the communication around it. If that communication around how targets aren't set isn't leaving whoever set them, whether it was a recommendation from our team or from senior leadership, it is going to feel like a little bit of a chosen out of thin air, a number that was just decided upon, because we aren't communicating the why your target was set there or how we got there, the math behind it. So I can see how it feels that way sometimes. But really, targets should be set with strategy. They should be set with data. They should be set with goals in mind so that everybody understands where the organization is going and why targets were set where they were.
And, when you're talking about setting targets and you're using that strategy, it's important to keep in mind, too, that curiosity. If for some reason you have a large gap against a target, we don't want to just automatically say it's wrong. The benchmarks are right. The data is wrong. You came up with it magically. Let's explain why. And sometimes what we find is it's because you have a high length of stay, or, maybe there are inefficiencies, with technology. There are pieces that are leading to the performance level. And instead of us just saying it's wrong, we need to really dive into that. And the next thing that we're going to talk through is the fact that we really need to meet. And we need to meet over and over and over again to make sure that projects move forward. Because after all, more meetings, improve communication, and frequent staff meetings where we're talking about what we're going to do, improve communication and efficiency.
Oh, okay. So more meetings. This is kind of living in that world of like death by meeting, right? And I think that there are a lot of executives, leaders out there right now that are listening that are thinking to themselves, if I have one more meeting, I'm not going to be able to get through any of my work. There are some of our client leaders that are in back-to-back meetings every single day. And it's impossible to even sit down and have a strategy session with them around where they're trying to take the organization as it relates to productivity. Meetings don't necessarily improve communication. communication. They don't necessarily improve coordination, and they really don't necessarily always move things forward, because we're going to have a meeting, and then we're going to have another meeting, and then we're going to have another meeting, and then maybe we're going to come back and make a decision. So I understand the thought around the meetings, because we think that's actually going to help with communication and coordination. But there's a reason why there's that saying, this meeting could have been an email. And I think that if we can think about that when we're trying to plan for a meeting, or we think we need a meeting because it's the right thing to do, take a step back and ask yourself, could this meeting be an email? And if it can be an email, go ahead and send that email. And if you see that there needs to be more communication around it, then go from there. But be honest with yourself. Are you just having the meeting because you're checking the box? Or is it actually going to lead to better communication, more coordination, and moving something forward?
And part of, the responsibilities as a leader, whether you're a manager, a director, vice president, or a C-level executive, is that you have responsibility for establishing vision and strategies and putting in the time to actually come up with the targets and goals. And if you're simply moving from meeting to meeting to meeting, and you actually do not have any space on your calendar to do those tasks, it becomes really difficult to execute. And when you're not able to execute, then a lot of other things, fall off, and then productivity can become a bigger issue, which brings us to standardization and the fact that standardized metrics, one size fits all, will work for every single hospital. Sometimes we'll see, hospitals that will just pick up targets from somewhere else that they've been, or they'll pick up targets from a competitor, and all of a sudden, there they are. So, this myth is that, productivity targets are one size fits all, and that standardized targets are going to work for everyone.
Oh, there's so much wrong with this. But I will say that I was on LinkedIn one day, and I actually saw, and I'm so sorry, but I saw a hospital executive post, does anybody have productivity benchmarks they want to share? And now I don't know why this individual was collecting these, if they were choosing to maybe use them at their organization, but that is where you are going to receive the most pushback from your team, because they're not targets that are yours. They're not productivity benchmarks that are yours, because let's think about it. How can we pick up productivity targets or benchmarks from another organization if we live in that world where we're constantly wanting to compare apples to apples, right? We're always talking about how unique we are. When we go into an organization and we hear the uniqueness of each and every organization, then how could we possibly pick up benchmarks from another organization and drop them into ours? There's so much that needs to go into it. The research that needs to go into building the right peer group, having that right data. And we talked about this. We talked about bad data a couple of lives ago. And it's so true. If you have bad data and somebody else's benchmarks, I'm sorry, but that's bad data. We're starting at a really bad foundation for success. So we want to make sure that we aren't living in that one size fits all, because a med-surg department over here that is 35 beds with an average daily census of 32 is very different than a med-surg unit with an average daily census of 10 over here. They're going to look different because of economies of scale, because of their staffing, because of just the sheer number of patients that they have. And we could go through an example one after another with every single department and explain why it's important to have your own benchmarks that are reflective of your operations, how you do business, and what your department looks like.
Absolutely. Every hospital has different needs, different patient demographics, different services, different dynamics. And I saw a recent article that also caused me a little bit of, I'd say, I don't want to say annoyance, but it did. They benchmark things off of calendar days. And again, when you're thinking about productivity metrics that are standardized and one size fits all, calendar days is the definition of one size fits all. It doesn't have any relationship to your volume, to your case mix index, to what you're doing. It just is. And, that really, really doesn't provide you with any information that's going to be valid to your specific hospital goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we kind of drive that message home with any of the engagements that we're working on, is that we will not at any cost use calendar days, because it is not, again, it's going back to bad data, and it's just not valuable for benchmarking or for target setting. And I can argue this, and I know that we have the conversations around fixed departments and areas that don't flex, but if anything, use benchmark data for comparison purposes, and you can then work off budget, but like, we cannot use calendar days. I completely agree.
And in the work that we do, we're often brought in, and many times we're sitting down with leaders and directors and managers, and they'll be like, yeah, we're just going to bide our time and wait until this passes. And, you're not the first productivity consultants that were here. Someone else, was working with us 3 years ago. We had another consulting assessment 10 years ago. It's just going to pass. It's a passing trend. Leadership's just going to move on from it. This is a one-hit wonder. Once this assessment's done, we can actually get back to providing care for our patients.
Oh, no. I mean, and I've seen it. You've seen it. We've all seen that one-hit wonder of a project. And this, that's actually a challenge, right? To continue that commitment and making it a priority. But if productivity is part of your everyday culture, if accountability and workforce optimization is part of your everyday culture, your everyday conversations, your processes, then it's not a one-hit wonder. And it can't be, because productivity has to be something that we are focused on in a proactive way that, again, is part of our business model, so that we don't get to the layoffs, right? See how it all kind of interacts and it all kind of works together? If we aren't a one-hit wonder, and it's part of our culture, part of our language, we know we're working towards improving processes and reducing waste and eliminating redundancy, then we aren't going to get to the point where we see that FTE creep, or we see the I need more to fix the problem, because the problem is being fixed through processes or technology, or pushing back and making sure that the processes are the right process, and identifying where the issues are within it. Then we aren't a one-hit wonder, because it is part of our everyday, and our team knows it. Our team embraces it. The leaders own it. They embrace it. They deliver that message on a regular basis. It isn't allowed to be a one-hit wonder, because it just exists within the organization as part of the culture and as part of the day-to-day operations.
Absolutely. Productivity cannot be the flavor of the month. It cannot be just the latest and greatest. It needs to be that fundamental strategy that's really driving the long-term strategic vision of the organization, which will then in turn drive operational results and financial results. And, often when we're brought in, some organizations, will say, well, we're not going to focus on any of the frontline staff. We're not going to take away anything from the clinical. We're only going to look at the administrative areas. We're only going to look at the overhead areas. We're only going to take a look at the unnecessary roles, or optimize and cut those roles that we deem aren't required. So one of the biggest things that we confront sometimes is that the perception that workforce optimization only means cutting unnecessary roles, which means we're going to look at maybe getting rid of our patient transporters. We're going to look at getting rid of some of our housekeepers. We might cut down on some of the administrative tasks, or people working the front desks. And that can be a very dangerous path to go if that's the only thing that you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, workforce optimization at the very basics, the foundation of it all is that it should be a holistic view around the organization and around all processes. And if you think about it, if we're going to kind of pick a position, and let's just say housekeeping, we're going to decrease our EVS team just because we feel like that's where we should focus, and without any data telling us that we should, without any real good solid reason, we just have decided we're going to arbitrarily focus there. Well, now that could lead to problems with what? So many different things, because we're talking about patient throughput, which our EVS staff is incredibly integral in that process to turn rooms. Right. So now we have discharges that are happening. We know our discharges sometimes can happen in batches. We're seeing those churns that are happening at around a certain time of day. We'd like them to happen a little bit earlier in the day, probably, but now they're happening maybe around 3:00. Well, we need that EVS team to turn those rooms so that we can then get the patients out of the ED or the patients out of the ambulatory surgery area that are just waiting on their rooms, or out of the PACU, get them out of those areas and into the house. But without EVS, how are we going to do that? Or without the right staff in EVS? And we could just continue through various positions that we think are unnecessary, which I don't know what I would consider unnecessary actually. But if that's the mindset that we're under, I think we're really cutting ourselves short of the big picture of how everything works together, because everything does work together across the organization. There's no area that is unnecessary in the whole process or the whole business of operations on a day-to-day basis. Again, it goes back to data. It goes back to aligning data and volume, aligning supply and demand, and making sure that we are optimizing our workforce. It's in the name itself, workforce optimization. We're going to optimize our processes so that we aren't just cutting what we feel maybe we don't need. Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is. It is. And, one of the things that comes to mind for me are the provider practices. And, many times when we're challenged financially, the first thing that we'll do is look at support staff and make, really deep cuts in those areas for the provider practices without understanding what that might mean to the volume that the provider is actually able to see. So sometimes if you create some new roles and some new responsibilities and structures, you can completely shift and change things, which is a great strategy to actually improve your profitability. Now, we've mentioned data, we've mentioned benchmarks, we've talked a lot about we need data, we need benchmarks. Without data, you cannot actually understand where your opportunities are. And, so I'm assuming technology is always going to increase productivity. If I have a lot of, unautomated functions, just automating them, that's going to improve my technology and improve my productivity. If I don't have an EHR putting it in, that's going to just improve everything, right? Isn't implementing new technology the best way to get more productive?
Oh, I think I almost laughed out loud at that. But I think that it's a great theory, right? Because technology it's meant to automate us. It's meant to improve processes. But if you're implementing something that's into a process that's already broken, well, then we aren't actually solving anything, right? Because the processes over here are broken, and now we're going to layer technology on top of it, which is just going to feel clunky to our team. It's going to be something that they're going to have to work through. Or if that technology isn't vetted or isn't set up appropriately, we're not necessarily improving our processes or increasing productivity, because now I have to click through 7 screens and answer the same thing 5 times just to finish my chart, or just to find something, or I'm going to implement this technology or this software, but now I have to go to 5 different places to find the information that I need. And that is actually one of I'd say the biggest pieces of feedback that we've received over the years when talking about productivity actually is that certain leaders and certain organizations have to go to various locations to find the information that they need. Now, all of that technology or all that software was layered in, all that reporting was layered in to improve productivity, to get us better reports. But if you have to go to multiple locations to figure out how productive you are against your target, where you stand against your percentile comparisons, what your overtime is, how much agency you're using, what your non-productive time is, then that's not exactly productive, is it? We're going into multiple locations to find that, which is what, when we're implementing things like this, we want to make sure that we're doing it right from the beginning, and we're not having to go in and then create workarounds or fix the problem or stop using it in general because it wasn't vetted and it wasn't implemented correctly, and we didn't have the processes in place to even implement it in the first place.
Absolutely. Technology by itself does not fix the issue and does not fix productivity. And, one of the, necessary things that often comes up is, if we're going to be productive and if you're, asking us to improve, you're just asking me to do more with less. Doesn't matter what else you're saying, but, you want me to do more with less. You're telling me I need to see more patients with less staff. You're telling me that I need to do more work with less hours. It means pushing my staff to work harder, and they're already burned out. They're already pushed over their limits. I cannot possibly ask them to do anything else because everyone's exhausted.
I mean, I can understand where this mindset or this theory comes from, right? I already feel overwhelmed. My team is telling me that they're overwhelmed. And now all of a sudden, productivity is coming into play. And how am I going to prioritize that? And how am I going to possibly do any more with less? Well, that's not productivity, right? Productivity is balancing volume and staff. Productivity is balancing workforce optimization with employee engagement. Productivity is about looking at processes and understanding how we can improve them. So if we were to go to our team and say, what are your challenges? What gets in your way? Do you have a solution that could actually help streamline processes? So now we're doing less with the same amount of people because we've streamlined processes.
Yes.
And we've reduced errors. So flip it around and think about it differently, because it's not necessarily about doing more with less. It's about doing the right amount of work to align with our volume, having the right people in place to do it. And sometimes we have really great people that work for us. They're just doing the wrong task. And so that leads to it too. You might have one less person, but now that person isn't the roadblock to success. That person is doing a job that's right for them. They may be helping out another department within the organization, but they were a roadblock in yours. So yeah, your headcount or your roster might be down one, but that individual is no longer serving as a roadblock for your processes. So if we flip how we're looking at it and really understand that it's about the balance of process improvement, employee engagement, patient satisfaction, fiscal responsibility, now we're coming at it from a different angle. And we can really see that it's not about doing more with less. It's about doing the right task at the right time with the right people.
And let's just go on, just a little bit of an example. Like, let's take the operating room, for example, and let's just mention that maybe, the productivity in particular operating room are higher than what they would expect at the meeting, et cetera. And you dive into that with curiosity, it's probably going to be that maybe you have a lot of first case starts that are late. You have a lot of downtime in between cases. The utilization of the ORs isn't correct. Maybe you have one more staff member that you need in each OR. But if you come at it from patient access and think through how can we get one more case into each OR per day, now we're improving and decrease the amount of time it actually takes to get the patients in. So looking at it and changing the angle makes everything different, which means that, if I'm a great leader and I know all of the things and I have all of the information I need, I'm an A player, top of the line, employee engagement is high, patient satisfaction is high. I don't need productivity. It's just going to pressure me, punish me. I don't need it. So the next
one, all figured out, right? But I think that the one thing we know about, I'll pause for 1 second and say, not all leaders are going to love productivity, and I get that. But all leaders need productivity. And if there's one thing that we know about great, strong leaders, is that they're continuous learners. Strong leaders embrace learning. They embrace collaboration. They embrace influencing change and being a visionary and having that strategic thinking mindset. So if you fall into that great leader category, as so many do in healthcare, you are going to embrace productivity because you are a continuous learner. You're constantly in that growth mindset, trying to better yourself, trying to better your team, give them an environment that's better for them, for where they're working, for their processes, so that they're not feeling overwhelmed. So I cannot agree with great leaders don't need productivity. I think they might not like it in all instances, but they need it because it is going to help manage the operations and the business of their department.
What we have learned, with the great leaders at our client hospitals and client locations is that they typically will end up embracing productivity. They might hate it at first, but once they understand that it helps them set realistic goals, it relates to their financial outcomes, it relates to their operational outcomes, it improves their quality, all of a sudden they know it drives accountability and they embrace it, which takes us to the next myth, which is productivity is evil. It increases stress, it increases burnout. It's going to force my staff to work harder. And regardless of anything that you can say, I don't like it. I don't want it. It's just bad.
I mean, it doesn't even make sense as a comment that productivity is evil, but okay, we'll go with it. But what I would say to that in response is that proven through years of experience, through data, through results, through sustained results, through changes in culture, changes in mindset that we've seen, is that productivity produces positive results. So if it's producing positive results, it clearly cannot be evil. It is not a punishment. It is not there to grade anybody or score anybody, as sometimes we feel that it is. Productivity produces positive results, therefore it cannot be evil. And that's going to be my answer to that one.
Yeah, when done correctly, productivity is the vehicle that will move an organization from chaos to control. It'll move it from, wasting resources to really focusing on the wellness of the finances, and it moves from burnout to balance. So when it's there, it really becomes that vehicle, as we said earlier, for a culture of excellence. And I do want to touch upon the fact that there's a strong correlation between highly productive organizations and strong quality healthcare organizations. The final myth or final thing that we want to debunk is the fact that can't have productivity and quality live in the same room. The reality is, if you're a best practice hospital and best practice organization, typically you're going to be best practice in productivity and best practice in quality and in employee engagement. They're not mutually exclusive. They're actually very correlated and very closely related.
Absolutely. Because again, it's the balance, right? We're focusing on all things, we're balancing all things, and quality is a huge part of that. So is our employee engagement. That's usually strong too. We aren't going to lose our employees because we're being more productive. We're actually going to empower them to have the confidence to do their jobs and to support the organization and drive results that are sustainable.
So this has been so much fun. We've definitely covered a lot of areas and a lot of productivity myths, stories that we tell ourselves, false, I'd say, dialogues that we have going on in our meetings and our brains and across the country. And the most important, message that I think RandiLynn said earlier is that productivity produces positive results. We see it time and time again. It produces positive results because it's going to impact your quality of care. It produces positive results because it improves your patient access. And across the board, at the end of the day, productivity can be the foundation for helping to build that culture of excellence. Any last myths or stories that you want to share?
I don't know that I have a myth or a story, but I have I think a piece of advice. If your productivity or your workforce optimization or your benchmarks are making you or your team feel any of the things that we said today that are the lies, the myths, the crazy thoughts around productivity, then you might have bad data. You might have the wrong partner for productivity for your organization, because you should not feel any of these things, especially the productivity is evil. That one is just going to stick with me. I think I'm going to harp on that one for a little bit, but if you're feeling that, then productivity is not meaningful to you and it's not meaningful to your organization. And you might have either the wrong data or the wrong partner in your journey. And I encourage you to figure out what's driving those thoughts and try to move your organization in a different direction if that's how you feel about it, if that's the culture around productivity.
Yeah, mindset is everything. And if your mindset around productivity, staffing effectiveness, workforce optimization has any of those negative connotations, please feel free to reach out to us. You can find us at altiushcg.com. There are a lot of white papers that are on there and a lot of information. You can reach out at info@altiushcg.com or even schedule a free strategy session. We'd be happy to talk through what you're currently doing and give you some strategies to succeed. So thank you all for joining us today. We'll look forward to the next time, and we appreciate you joining our LinkedIn Live.
Yes, thank you all.